Welcome to the CWK show, Conversations with Katinda Live, where we talk about this thing we call life. I'm your host, Katinda Dollar, the author of The Big Comeback, the founder of the Confidence and Self-Esteem Academy. And I am so excited today because our topic is just one of those topics that we need to know something about. And the question is, what will you do to protect you and your family in case of an earthquake? Now, in today's show, we are blessed to be in the presence of Susan Davey. Susan is the manager, Community Connections at Victoria State Emergency Services, VIC SES. Hello and welcome to the show, Susan.
Hi, Katinda. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, Susan, in our conversation today, you'll be sharing, educating, and giving us some tools, strategies, and resources, equipping us with what to do when emergencies such as earthquakes does occur. Now, but before we begin, Susan, I'd love to know, how are you feeling today?
I'm fine, thank you, Katinda. I'm really good. Had a great day.
Yes? Had a good weekend as well?
I did have a good weekend. It was nice, although we can't do much at the moment, but we did have a little bit of sunshine, so it was nice to get outside in the sun.
Thank you. Now, Susan, you work with all communities to ensure that they know what to do when emergencies do occur. And VIC SES, which is Victoria State Emergency Service, is the emergency service that manages earthquake emergencies. So then, we just experienced an earthquake not very long ago. What is an earthquake and why do they happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. I might just start by explaining a little bit about Victoria State Emergency Service, or we call it VICSES for short. In Victoria, all of the different emergency services take the lead on the different emergencies. So at SES, we're responsible for earthquake, flood, storm, tsunami, and landslide. And we're also the largest provider of road crash rescue in Victoria. So it's quite a mixed bag of emergencies that we take the lead on. And we also support the other emergency services with all the other things that happen in Victoria. So our volunteers are really very busy right across the state. And Victoria SES is a completely volunteer service. There are staff like me, but there aren't that many staff. All of the services that we provide to the community are through volunteers. So it's just great to know that, for everybody to know that. But tonight we're talking about earthquakes. So your question about why do earthquakes occur, I'm not a geologist, I'm not an expert in earth science, but what happens, there are big plates on the surface of the earth, big land plates, and they move against each other. And they move in a few different ways. Sometimes they might go side by side, so they run along beside each other. And as they move, that causes a little bit of friction, and every now and then they'll just slip a little bit. So that's one way that earthquakes occur. And we know those areas as fault lines. We call them fault lines on the Earth's surface. Another thing that can happen is the plates can move closer together. So one plate can slide under another one, and every now and then they'll just slide a little bit, and that will cause an earthquake as well. And if the plates are sliding together in other parts, they might be pulling apart a little bit. And so when they move apart just that tiny little bit, there's an earthquake. So that's really what causes earthquakes. But the one that happened in Victoria just a couple of weeks ago was quite a surprise for everybody, I think. And we now know that it was the biggest earthquake in Victoria since white settlement, so in the last couple of 100 years. And that was even a little bit different to what I've described. So sometimes there's some pressure sort of pushing in, and every now and then the Earth's surface will just kind of it's hard, I don't know what words to use, kind of just pops a little bit, and there's a little bit of a shake, and things will usually settle down again. But mostly the earthquakes happen on fault lines.
Fault lines, thank you. Now
I'll just add one more thing, Katinda. So in Australia, we're quite lucky because we sit in the middle of one of those plates. So we do have some fault lines in Australia, but not the really big ones that we know about around the world.
So, the recent earthquake, like you said, it's not happened for so many years. It seemed to go for approximately 20 to 30 seconds. And we've never seen this kind of magnitude before, in most of us really in our lifetime, right? So, I felt like it was like a moment of confusion before we got to figure out, like everybody who felt it, something was cracking before like, what is it? And by the time you realize an earthquake, it's already gone. So how then can people prepare for an earthquake?
Yeah, it's a really great point. So I myself it took me a few seconds to realize what was happening, and I've never experienced an earthquake like that before in my life either. But I've done lots of reading, and I know lots about what we're supposed to do, and we know that from lived experience in all over the world. So there are some parts of the planet, of the earth, where earthquakes happen all the time, and people are very used to feeling those earth tremors and earthquakes. So people who live in those areas are pretty good. They really know what to do because it's something that happens all the time. But in Australia and in Victoria in particular, it's not something that we think about much because it just doesn't happen, right? So the key thing to do when an earthquake happens is not to move, even though our instincts might be to get outside or to move around. We know that most injuries occur when people are moving while the earth is shaking, while there's movement. So the key thing is that we drop, we cover, and we hold. So for example, I'm sitting here at my desk. If there was an earthquake now, I need to get down onto the floor, get under the table, and hold on to the table, because as the earth is moving, furniture will move as well. It'll jump across the room if the earthquake is big enough. If I'm under the table, I'm protected if things are falling. So it's quite interesting. If we lived somewhere where earth tremors and earthquakes were common, we'd prepare our homes for it as well. So for example, behind me over there, you can see there's a bookshelf, and if everything was shaking, the books could fall off the bookshelf, the things I have on top could fall off, or the bookshelf could fall over. So if I got up from my desk and took off out of the door, the bookshelf could fall on me as I'm leaving the room. So that's why it's important to protect myself by getting under the table. So if you have that option, that's the safest thing to do, but you don't always have a table, right?
That's actually was my next question. So where do you hide when there's no table to go under?
Yeah, so what you would do then, if you were in a room, is it's really important. One thing I also didn't mention, there's a window right here as well, is stay away from windows because the glass will break and can fall in and cut you. So there's a few things to think about. Stop, drop, and hold is our number one thing. If we can't, we need to always drop down, so get down onto the ground so that we don't fall over if the earth is or the building is moving. If there's no table, get up against a wall, sit against a wall, and cover your head, because if anything does fall, we're going to try and protect our head. If you have something, so for example, I have my notebook, I could use that to try and protect my head. So you use whatever's around you, because as we know, an earthquake will happen really suddenly. We won't get any warning. And so you just have to think really fast and take protective action as quickly as you can. One of the other things that I know I was taught when I was younger is to get into a doorway. So I'm sure many people would have heard that. But what we know is that depending on what sort of building you're in, many internal walls, they're not sturdy. The doorways aren't strong. So we would only really say to protect yourself in a doorway if you're absolutely sure and you know that the structural integrity of the doorway. So really, the key thing, drop, cover, hold. If you can't get under a table to protect you, sit down, protect yourself as much as you can.
Now, you just touched on there, obviously, the doorway being one of the myths that people think is something you need to do. So is it then, are we supposed then, like when you go to live in a place, are those some of the questions you need to ask? What is the strongest point of this place, so that in case of an earthquake, we know where to hide if we can't go on a table?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess I guess it wouldn't hurt to know that. I certainly don't know in my house, to be really honest with you. It's not something that I think about. So I really think that the most important thing is to know, don't move, that, and get down, and we need to wait for the shaking to stop.
Okay, so so what are really the signs that we might experience an earthquake? I mean, like you're saying, we haven't had something to this magnitude for so many years. So was there a warning that was coming, or did it catch you guys all by surprise as well?
We usually don't get any warning about earthquakes. And although that was the biggest one we've had, we do have regular little earthquakes in Victoria. Nobody feels them generally, or there might be a tiny little tremor and a handful of people will report it. So one of the things that I can tell you about in Australia, Geoscience Australia are the government organisation that keep an eye on earthquakes. And when there's an earthquake, you can go to the Geoscience Australia website and report that you felt it, and it will ask exactly where you are. So what we call them are felt reports. So if we have a tiny little earthquake, magnitude 2, magnitude 3 maybe, that happens, quite a few happen in the Gippsland area, for example, in Victoria. We'll report it, but often nobody feels it. So the monitoring equipment that that Geoscience Australia have, that keeps an eye on movement in the movement in the land in Australia, will say there was a little earthquake. They'll tell you the magnitude. They'll tell you how deep the earthquake was, and we can all report it. So we can all be citizen scientists in that way. So it's not that we never have earthquakes. We do have tiny little ones, quite a lot. Well, I shouldn't say a lot, a bit. They happen sometimes. But this big one was quite a surprise. And yes, to be honest, it took us all by surprise. We don't get any warning. We don't know what's going to happen. So unlike, storms or floods where we know there's lots of rain falling, or we're going to get big winds, or we know when we have big bushfire days, so we can actively prepare in the lead up. Earthquakes are different to that. And so that's why what we're talking about tonight is so important, to actually know what to do to keep yourself as safe as you can when it happens.
So we have a question here from a viewer. Can the ground open up and swallow people?
It's a bit of a myth, Katinda. No, the ground will move, but no, the ground doesn't usually open up and swallow people. Although, I have seen cracks, forming in the ground, but it's not something that we would really expect to see, no.
Okay. Now, if somebody was actually sleeping, because I know we're all in lockdown and majority of us were indoors. So if someone was sleeping and hypothetically the building collapsed, I mean, even you saw this coming and you protect yourself, how do you get evacuated? I mean, how do you even do anything because you're crushed? And we're assuming sometimes you might not be able to breathe, or really, it's a really bad situation.
Yeah, it is a bad situation. And if that happened, it is important to know what you should do. So you just need to imagine what would happen if a building did fall down, and we were okay, we were still awake and able to move. One of the things that would be very dusty. So it's important not to move around too much, because you don't want to create any more dust. And you might even need to protect your breathing by putting something over your mouth. So I've got a scarf on, maybe using a scarf or a piece of clothing, whatever's handy, so that we're not breathing in lots of dust. So it's just something to think about. And as you can imagine, if that happened, there would be a lot of action to help people. And we know that when emergencies occur, the people that help first are the people that are around you. So emergency services would swing into action, but it will take a little bit of time. So what's important is to think about how you would be heard, so that somebody knows you're there. So again, it's think about what's around you. Tapping, knocking. So knocking, those kind of things will alert people to know that you're there. And you might need to shout, but you need to listen and hear what's going on. You don't want to be shouting too much if there's lots of dust and stuff in the air. So thinking about how you would alert people to know you're there. Another thing that I think is really important if you are in that situation is you don't light a match or light a lighter or anything like that, because if the building has collapsed, then there could be gas pipes, gas leaking, all sorts of things. So although I can't imagine what it would be like to be in that situation, but I guess it's about trying to stay as calm as you can and know the help will be coming.
Okay, so there's this thing I saw when I was reading about earthquakes, about having a torch. How practical is that?
Yeah. What I would say about that, after what we've just spoken about, that it can happen anytime. Like, I don't have a torch handy, but you know what? We all have our phone really close to us, right? And we probably all know how to turn the torch on our phone. So that's one thing that we know. Most people are within arm's reach of their phone all the time, right? So this is an important safety tool for you, as long as the mobile networks are working. But I just want to talk about emergency kits for a moment, because in emergency services, we really encourage everybody to have an emergency kit. That even a simple kit would have a torch, a battery torch in it, a battery operated radio, because you can get lots of information from the radio, and the radio system will be working when the internet's not working. So really important, and it needs to be battery operated in case the electricity is not working. We'd also encourage in an emergency kit to have important documents, so backup things on a USB drive, so you've got that in your emergency kit, and some non-perishable food and water is really important. When you say to have a torch, how important is it? Super important, but when the earth shakes, it's not really close by. But what we do know is that we can lose power, and so that's when a torch is really important, and we don't want to light a candle in case there's gas leaks. So to think about that. So I do have a torch that is in one of my kitchen drawers. And I check the batteries regularly, so I know that if the power goes out, I can put my hand on that torch straight away. So I think that's just a really important safety thing. And depending on what sort of a home you live in, you might need to evacuate a building. You might need to go downstairs. There might not be any lighting. So it's a safety thing, because many people get injured in the aftermath of earthquakes by falling over debris or getting caught in debris. So being able to see is really important. The earthquake that we had in Victoria a couple of weeks ago happened at 9:15 in the morning. So it was daylight, we could all see. But if it happened at 9:15 at night, it might be a different story if power went out. And power did go out in some places of Victoria. It was restored very quickly. But it's an important safety thing, and it's simple and it's not expensive to have a battery powered torch.
So, but what would happen if somebody was walking or driving when the earthquake happened? Because I know a lot of people who didn't even feel it.
Yeah.
So what should they do?
Yeah. So if you're driving and you're feeling the earth move, you need to just stop the car and wait for the shaking to stop. Don't get out of the car. Stay where you are. If you're walking, if you're outside, you need to do exactly what I said we do inside. Drop, cover, hold, just wait until the ground stops shaking. It's also important when you're outside to think about some of the other hazards. So when I talked about being in here with the bookshelf and things that might fall, it's important to just be aware when you are outside about power lines, or if you're near buildings that might have potential to bits of them to fall off and things like that. So it's really about being aware of your surroundings, because it will happen with no notice. We've already talked about that. But stop moving is the key piece of safety information, so you don't fall and injure yourself.
So there is a question here. In case a family was separated during an earthquake, like we're all at home and there's little kids in different bedrooms and they got separated, what needs to happen next?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And there's more to just being separated in a house. We might be separated because we're not actually physically close to each other. And it's something that is a really important thing for families to talk about for any emergency. So when we plan for if we make an emergency plan, it's one of the things that we say, where will the family meet? What's our meeting point? So when my children were little, when we talked about what if the house caught fire, we had a meeting point at out the front. So we get out of the house and we meet out near the letterbox. So that's very simple. If we're in the house and the house is damaged, if there are children, your instinct is to go and find the children, and that is just what you would do. You would be just doing your best to do that. But if there was a really large event, and it doesn't matter what it is, it could be an earthquake, it could be a big storm or floods or something like that, because we can have flash flooding and flooding in the city as well. You don't need to live on a riverbank for that to happen. And home wasn't the safest place. It's important to talk about where your meeting place might be, and there could be many different things. So in an urban environment like in Melbourne, you might decide that we're going to meet at a shopping centre or on a particular corner or at the children's school or whatever works for your family. But the only way that you'll know where to go is if you talk about it beforehand and that the family has that plan.
What if they're little kids who you can't do that conversation with? Like we're talking somebody with babies and they're obviously sleeping in a different room and you can't probably rescue them. Do you do, what they say, you save yourself first and figure out how to help them? What do you do?
Yeah, I think that's what you would do, Katinda. It depends on the situation that you're confronted with. You can also call for help. So call 000 and you need to say what your emergency is and what's happened. The other thing I already mentioned is the people that will help you first are the people around you. So if you're okay, and I can't even imagine what it would be like to have a baby in another part of the house that you couldn't get to, but you would, call for help and you would just have to work out. Depends on what the situation is. But definitely call 000 so that the emergency services know that you need help.
Wow. And what about people who live in high-rise apartments? What do they need to do? Because there is no time to evacuate, really.
Yeah, no, there's not. So if we think about being up high, so up many floors, the same rules apply. We drop, we cover, we hold. When the shaking stops, then we can think about getting out of the building. Never use the lifts. Never ever use the lifts if something like that happens. I bet the lifts wouldn't be working anyway if there was damage. But so you need to go down the stairwell. And again, this is where a torch can be, really important. But you need to think, imagine trying to walk downstairs with, lots of people around you if the building's moving. The chances of slipping or falling or injuring yourself is quite high. So you need to wait until that shaking stops and then get out of the building. The other thing that happens while the earth is moving is in the building, windows and things will break, and so glass can be falling down. So as you're trying to get out of the building, you could be hit by debris that can injure you as well. So that's why it's so important while there's movement to stay still. But it's about waiting for that shaking to stop and then evacuating in an orderly and safe way, and helping people who around you who might need some assistance.
So what about disabled people? How do
Yeah,
they, does it apply, the same rules apply to them?
Yep, the same rules apply. So, for example, if I was a disabled person in a wheelchair, I probably wouldn't get down on the floor, but I would still cover and hold. So I'd put the brakes on my wheelchair on, so I'm not rolling around, and cover and wait for the shaking to stop. Now, if a disabled person is living high up and relied on the lift, for example, that's when it's really important to call 000 so that help can come to evacuate that person out of the building. But there's lots of different disabilities. It's not just people who are in wheelchairs. We can have elderly people who might not be very mobile, who use a walking frame. So in that instance, that's one example. We might have blind people, deaf people, people who are on the autism spectrum, who are overwhelmed by what's happening around them. One of the things at Victoria SES that we really promote is knowing your neighbours. So it doesn't matter where you live, knowing your neighbours is really important, and being able to say hi to them. You don't have to be best friends, but it's really important to know that someone who lives close to you might need a little bit of help. So if you live, up in a high-rise building, and the person that lives next door to you, you know that they can't walk down the stairs, you can make sure that help comes for them. You might also have other vulnerable people around you. So say you've got a young family, so you've got mum and 2 or 3 children living next door, and dad's out working, or the opposite, dad might be home with the children, mum might be out working, but to evacuate with 3 small children would be really hard. So it's about knowing who's around you and who might need a hand, and also you know that they're the people that if you needed help would help you as well. So it's important just for a sense of community, but it's also important when things go wrong, that the people around you will be the ones that reach out to support you.
So in the community, what do people need to start doing? Do we need to start talking more about this kind of things? I mean, this was a wake-up call for all of us because, we've got COVID-19, and then in the middle of all that, then we get an earthquake. So it's like, what's next now? Yep.
I think it's really important to be aware of what I would call the hazards. So we call them all the different hazards. And in Victoria, we do have the Victorian government has the Vic emergency app, so you can download that and have it on your phone. And I would really encourage everybody to do that. And you can set up a watch zone, so an area around your home, and it depends where you live. I actually don't live in Melbourne, so my watch zone's quite big, and I live in a bushfire area. So I want to know what's happening out around me. But when I'm in the city, I probably don't need such a big watch zone. And you can also choose what you get notified about. And that's important. So I would encourage everybody to be notified about floods and storms and possibly fires. It just depends where you live. But that means when something's going on around you, your phone will ping and you'll be able to see what's happening. So it's really important to be aware of what's going on. We've already spoken a little bit about some of the simple things that we can do to be prepared. Knowing your neighbours is a really great preparation thing that we can all do, but thinking about the emergency plan. So we've spoken about what I call family reunification if something goes wrong, right? So knowing what the plan is for that. We've also spoken about what we can have in an emergency kit so that, if the power goes off or if we get stuck, we've got a radio, a torch, a phone charger. Like your phone, if it runs out of battery, is no good. We need to keep that charged up. And some drinking water, clean drinking water, and perhaps some non-perishable food. And if you've got some cans of food, you need a can opener. So no good having the can if you can't get into it. So just some simple things like that. I also encourage another fantastic app that people can use is a Red Cross app called Get Ready. And that steps you through an emergency plan. And you can do it on your phone as well. If you don't have a phone or you don't feel comfortable doing that, There's lots of information on the Emergency Services website. So on the Victoria State Emergency Service website, there's information about how to prepare and get ready. But I think the number one thing is talking to the people that you live in the house with and having a plan. And I would also encourage including all the people who live in the house in that conversation, including children. So there's some simple things that children can do to be prepared as well and to help their family. So it might be, if a child is small, that if we're going to leave because of an emergency, that they get their favourite toy. A simple thing like that means that that child has comfort, and if you're somewhere strange, if you end up in an evacuation centre or wherever, that the child has something that is a comfort to them, and that might be the thing that they need to think about. They grab their teddy bear or whatever the special item might be. So it's about having the conversation, thinking about the simple things that you can have in your emergency kit. A torch is a really important thing. Thinking about the people who are around you and knowing where you would go if you needed to leave your home. So do you have friends and family that don't live in the immediate area where you are? If there's a big emergency and people need to move out of an area, we would usually open a relief centre or an evacuation centre, and you'll hear about that on the radio. But, you know, with social media, the message gets out pretty quickly, and people will talk and help each other. So it's about the conversations and thinking about the simple steps that we can take to protect ourselves and our homes.
And what's your organization actually doing to help put that information out there? I mean, I know you've got a website, but what else are they doing in the community to just empower, inspire, educate, get people to be aware, like you said?
Yeah. So we definitely have our website, and I encourage everybody to have a look at that. We have a great earthquake page, and I can send you the link for that, Tinder, so you could share that. We use social media, so it would be fantastic if people who are listening tonight could follow Victoria State Emergency Service on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, whatever platform they use. And safety messaging comes out via those platforms all the time. And our volunteers are also very active in the community, speaking to community members about all sorts of safety, all sorts of safety discussions. Unfortunately, the last 18 months has hampered that quite a bit. But normally, we're out at community events, we're visible. Victoria SES volunteers wear orange, so their uniform is orange, so they're very visible. Our rescue vehicles are white, but we have an orange check on them, and the blue and red flashing lights, our rescue trucks and all of those things. So if you ever see any SES volunteers out at a community event, come up and say hello. And they'd love to have a chat about how you can keep safe in the community. But at the moment, because of COVID, it's really been kind of tricky. So our channels are really our website and our social media channels. And whenever there's an emergency that we're responsible for, we will speak to the press as well. So we'll be on the radio and the TV giving safety messages.
And so how can we practice what we should do in case of an earthquake? You've talked a lot about things today, but you were talking about how in October you have an emergency drill that actually happens across the world. What is that about?
Yeah, so that's called the Great Shakeout Drill, and it started in California quite a few years ago because California is quite is on the fault line, so they have lots of earthquakes. They have potential for really big earthquakes, and so on a particular day at a particular time, everybody is encouraged to practice to drop, cover, and hold. So this year, the Great Shakeout is on October the 21st, and we're doing it at 11 a.m. on October 21. Now, I talk about the Great Shakeout every year at work and say we should get this exercise up and running and get the community involved. But because nobody thinks about earthquakes in Victoria, it's not been something that we promote it, but it's not been something that we've done in a really more organised way. But this year we are really encouraging the people of Victoria to participate in the Great Shakeout. So you just have a practice at 11 a.m. wherever you are. We think about what's around us. So like what I spoke about earlier, where I'm sitting now, what would I do if there was an earthquake? If we're outside, if you're outside in the street, you don't need to drop down to the ground and cover your head, because that would look a bit weird. But even just thinking about what would I do at this time. So Katinda, I will share some information, and I would love it if you would share it with your networks. And we're really hoping that we can get quite a lot of Victorians having a practice and think about what they would do if there was suddenly an earthquake on October the 21st.
Wow. So is that something that's going to be really out there promoted so everybody knows about it?
Yeah, we will be promoting it. We'll be promoting it leading into it. But there's also the Great Shakeout. If you Google, just go online and Google the Great Shakeout, you'll see all the places in the world where it's happening.
Wow, that's a very good initiative.
Yeah, it's a fantastic initiative, and it's especially great in areas of the world where they have lots of earthquakes. But one day we'll be able to travel again, and you never know where you'll find yourself. In a part of the world where you might actually experience an earthquake, and it's important to know what to do.
It's interesting. I get a question here from someone asking, if you were on a plane, would you feel the earthquake?
No, you wouldn't, because you're not on the ground. That's a great question.
Yeah, because I think sometimes we forget it's, you don't know, you're in the space. So
yeah, but what happens on the ground at airports if there's an earthquake is you need to get out and check the runways really quickly, because you can't let a plane land after there's been some movement without making sure that the runway is safe.
Wow.
So in the plane you're okay, but on the ground there'd be quite a lot of running around and checking to make sure that everything's all right.
Now we hear, like with this earthquake that we just had, what are we still waiting to see an aftermath, or did we already experience that?
We had 16 or 17 aftershocks. After the earthquake.
What happened? What is it that we felt?
So they were much smaller. Nobody felt. I shouldn't say nobody. They were felt by some, a few people, but by and large, none of us felt those aftershocks. They were very small, but they happened around the same area, and that's what you would expect to happen. That wasn't unusual, but no, we don't know. We don't expect. We just don't know what will happen. Really, it's just one of those things. Earthquakes are unpredictable. And it's just one of those things that occur.
So, but are you saying that we could still get an aftershock even now?
We possibly could, but but by and large they've been very small.
Right.
Very small. But because of the unpredictability of earthquakes, they can happen at any time.
Wow. Okay. Now, Susan, before we conclude, what is one action you can tell the viewers to take in order for them to stay safe in case of an emergency? Or rather, are there any emergencies we should get prepared for in the near future?
Yeah, well, I would, obviously I work for an emergency service, and talking about emergencies and how we stay safe is what I completely love to do. I really enjoy the work I do. So at the moment, in our part of the world, we're on a La Nina watch. So the Bureau of Meteorology are saying we have La Nina-like conditions.
Yes.
So when we have a La Nina, that means that we are expecting wetter conditions, so more rain. And so at the moment, we've been doing a lot of preparing for the possibility of flooding. And it's really important. There's some important things that we need to know about keeping safe if there's flooding, and probably the most important thing there is that we never enter floodwater. We don't drive in floodwater, we don't walk in floodwater, we don't play in floodwater, we don't swim in floodwater. Floodwater is really dangerous. So knowing what to do if there are floods is really important. But the one thing that I think the Victoria State Emergency Service, the hazard that I think can affect all of us at any time is storms. and we can get some quite ferocious storms with big winds and heavy rain. So, and knowing how to prepare your home and what to do if you get caught in a storm is really important. So they're things that we can be preparing for. And again, there's lots of information on the Victoria State Emergency Service website. But if you ask me one action that we could take, I would probably I would say the one thing is having the information, so knowing and knowing what might occur, and that would probably be to download the Vic Emergency app and have it set up on my phone. And my other favourite action, which I've spoken about already, is knowing your neighbours.
Yes.
So, just knowing who's around you and knowing that you could reach out to them if you needed a hand, or offer support to neighbours as well.
So on that note, so when do we expect to be seeing flash flooding? Anytime soon?
Well, flash flooding can happen. We have had some flash flooding recently in Melbourne over the last couple of weeks. It can happen when we have really heavy rain falling, in a really short period of time, and our drains and things don't cope. So we can have water over roads or even entering homes quite quickly. But it depends where the rain falls. So if we've got a really widespread rain event, and so we know we're getting lots of rain, we can do some preparing. But we can have a storm, a big storm cloud that drops a lot of rain in a small area, and we can end up with some flooding that can happen at any time when we've got heavy rainfall. There are some areas in Melbourne that are really prone to flash flooding, and at SES we make sure that the people who live in those areas know that they are in a high risk area. But again, you just need a block to drain, and you can have water all over the road. So it's about just being aware of your surroundings, and if there is flood water, don't walk in it, don't enter it, because it could have all sorts of nasty things in it, like sewage or other debris and things that might hurt you.
Wow. And so who should people contact in case of emergency? You said before maybe 000, but then there's also SES. So is there a number they can actually contact?
Yep, there is a number. It's 132-500 or 132-500, and that's the number that you call for a flood or storm emergency. And there are lots of things that can happen in floods and storms, some that we haven't spoken about. With high winds, tiles can come off roofs, so you might have a leaking roof. Our volunteers can come out and put a tarp on your roof to stop the rain coming in, or trees can come down and damage homes. There's lots of different things. So if ever that happens, 132-500, and SES volunteers will come and help you. And just on that, Katinda, one thing that I would really love to say to all of the people that are listening tonight is at SES, we're always looking for new volunteers, and SES volunteers are highly trained. You learn lots of new skills and meet lots of new people. So it's like a second family. Everybody supports everybody else, and you get out and you can help the community. So we always love to hear from people who would be keen to volunteer for SES.
So who do they need to contact if they want to volunteer?
Yep. Again, I'm pushing everyone to our website. So you need to get on and have a look at the Join Us section on our website and reach out. I will say that there's quite a commitment to be a state emergency service volunteer, particularly for getting out to do all the storm things, because you need to be able to use chainsaws, you need to be able to climb on roofs. All of those things are quite technical, and you need to do it safely. We're very, very focused on safety in our organisation. So there's quite a bit of training that needs to happen with that. Depending on where you live, if you joined a unit that does road crash rescue, there's a whole lot of training that goes with that to be able to help people when they have car crashes, if they get stuck in cars. And we also do things like help police in searches, and we might help provide lighting at different police events. So there's a lot of different things that that SES volunteers do. The one that I love the most is engaging with community. So it's really fantastic to have a culturally diverse volunteer group, so that you know, there are people that in different communities that look like the communities they come from, basically, you know, and it's really great when we have volunteers who can speak languages other than English as well. It just really helps with being able to get that safety message out. So to do community engagement, you don't necessarily, if you don't want to climb on a roof or use a chainsaw, that's fine. If you're really keen to share those safety messages with community, being a community engager at SES, we'd love to hear from you.
How long is the training for?
Well, it depends. The training, there's quite a bit involved with it, but it depends on which pathway that you're taking. But you would come along to a unit every week for a couple of hours a week, and there's like training every week, so you're learning new skills all the time, and all sorts of interesting skills. I think they're interesting, like you need to know how to tie all the knots, and there's things that you probably never think about, but yeah, to be able to tie the right knot for the right job, you know, it just really depends. There's a whole lot of different skills. I'm not the best person to talk to about that, but if you were interested in hearing more about that, we could get someone that could explain all of that to your community.
It actually sounds like it's teaching you survival tricks.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah. SES volunteers learn a range of skills that can help them in their everyday life. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing.
It's a bit like you know, like Scouts and Girl Guides.
Yes,
you know, it's
yes.
that.
I was a Girl Guide, I know. Yes.
I was a Girl Guide too. It's much more sophisticated, you know, but it's a similar kind of thing. Yeah, you smiled when I said knots. I thought, yeah, she knows her knots.
Yeah, we did all that, you know, all the interesting things that I guess really I look at it was a life skill. You know, at the time maybe we thought it was just doing it, but now as an adult, it's things that you learn that actually help you in your everyday life.
Yep, and that's what you get as an SES volunteer as well.
Yeah, that's a lot of benefits right there. So Susan, thank you so much for your insight and for sharing how to stay safe before, during, and after an earthquake, and also including talking about the flooding, because that's all critical, important. Everybody needs to be aware. And thank you for sharing all those websites, which we're going to obviously tag along on the chat, on the comment section, so people know where to find the information if they're interested. So to the audience, thank you for being so fabulous and for watching the CWK show, Conversations with Katinda Live. Until next time, stay safe, and may all of you experience the frequencies of love and light. Stay blessed.